Hello guys, hello everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to our lesson, okay? Online lesson in streaming. This lesson, as the others, will be put on YouTube and you will have the link as soon as possible. The link, as usual, will be also published in the folder The Victorian Age and namely in the subfolder Dickens. In fact, this lesson deals with Charles Dickens. You already know something about him because you studied some material which I sent you. You also did a kind of test with some exercises dealing with the most important themes and the most important events in Dickens's life. So I hope that everybody has learned something about this man who used to be one of the most important and representative of the Victorian age in Britain. Today we're focusing on some particular aspects of his novels, namely we're focusing on his style, on the characters that he portrayed in his novels, on the setting of most of his novels, on the themes of his novels, and on the also on the aim which that Charles Dickens proposed himself when he wrote novels. I guess that you already know some of these things because you have dealt with them in the videos, in the short videos, and in the texts that I sent you. But this time I will focus more specifically on some of these features, on some of the features of Dickens's novels. So, as I usually do, I will share my desktop, and you will be also able to see me on the bottom, on the right bottom of the page. As usual, okay, don't forget that the presentation that I am now showing you is the same that you will be able to find in the folder Dickens Online, okay? So in your Didattica. Ok, presentazione. Ok, here we are. So the very first thing that I want to say is that Charles Dickens, with his life, covered a very long period of time. So almost the entire, or almost the first and the second part of the Victorian age. So he's usually considered a late and mid Victorian novelist. And as you can see here, he was born in 1812 and he died in 1870, and then he was buried in Westminster Abbey. And he is generally known as a social novelist. What do I mean when I say social novelist? I mean that Charles Dickens mostly wrote novels which dealt with the problems, the difficulties, and also the most important characteristics of British Victorian society. Um, his novels were really very different one from the others. They, in fact, went from humor to tears. We have some of his novels, something of what Charles Dickens wrote that is really hilarious, is really humorous, and you can laugh very easily when you read some of his pages, but at the same time, some of his pages can make you cry. Okay, so his novels can lead you both to laughing and to crying. Okay, weeping your tears. How many novels did Charles Dickens write? He wrote 15 novels, but don't forget that his last is incomplete. He had just started to write it when he died after this, dramatic train accident and after his decay. Then, but he didn't write only 15 novels. In fact, as we said, he was a very prolific writer, and in fact he wrote a lot of short stories, a lot of essays, a lot of novellas, a lot of articles. And so his literary production is really huge, is really very big. And what are the most important characteristics of his novels, of his 14 and a half novels, 15 novels in total, as we said? They are the ones that you can read listed here. The first was his inventiveness. What do I mean? That he was the creator of a lot of unforgettable characters. His mind, his fancy was really enormous, was really big, and it allowed him to create a lot of characters that are really unforgettable. Think, for example, of Scrooge, okay, in A Christmas Carol, or think of Oliver Twist, or think of the Little Dorrit, or think of, for example, I don't know, Mr. Mikoba. They are now, most of all in Britain, okay, for the British people, unforgettable characters which everybody knows. Okay, so this is one of the most important characteristics of Dickens novels, his ability to create unforgettable characters, to create a lot of unforgettable characters who are extremely different one from the others. Then, another characteristic of his novels is Dickens' sympathy with the oppressed. We have already said much about it. When you listened to the recording that I sent you, when you watched the video that I sent you, in one of the two videos, I hope you have focused on the idea that most of Dickens' success was due, okay, to the fact that he sympathized with the oppressed, with the lost, with those people in British society which had always been neglected, who had always been set apart, okay, who were not important in society for most of the people, the poor, the workers in factories, the thieves, for example, the pickpockets, the women. Okay, so all these oppressed, neglected people were, okay, central, crucial characters. And they were not only characters, but he showed, okay, his sympathy with them because he actually felt like he was one of them. You know that he struggled in his life. He had a lot of problems. He faced a lot of problems. He fixed his life. He managed to be a respectable Victorian man, but he never forgot where he came from, the problems that his family had, the fact that his father was sent to prison for debts, where he spent about 3 months, the fact that when he was just a child, he was sent to work in a factory, okay, and he never forgot all of these problems that he had to face in his life. So his sympathy with the oppressed was really very strong, and people liked it because he never felt like a person who judges the other, but he understood the others. He understood how the things went on. Mm. Then another characteristic of Dickens's novels is his strong indignation against the social injustice. We know how full of contrasts the Victorian society was. We focused more than once on these differences, on these contrasts which characterized the Victorian society. And Victorian society was based on social injustice. some very rich people, the factory owners, the shopkeepers, the industrialists, on the other side, the workers in factories, the children, the women who were spoiled, who had to work for very long hours. We know how the social situation was, and we know that it was based on a kind of social injustice. And Dickens, in his works, in his novels, expressed his indignation against this social injustice. Then, another of the characteristics which is really fundamental to understand Dickens's novels, and then we will see to understand his style, okay, the way he wrote, what he wrote actually, is the importance of the importance of the way he actually published his novels. If you go back to what we have already said, you will remember the importance of the installments, so of these periodical publications, which were very fundamental for the expansion, for the enlargement of the reading public during the Victorian Britain. And the fact of publishing all or almost all of his novels in installments, so the serialization, was a fundamental characteristic. We will see why. Because it influenced, it shaped his style, what he wrote and how he wrote. Then another characteristic which is really important, is really fundamental, might be or is his humor. We started this lesson stating that Dickens's novels can both make us laugh and cry. But don't forget that his humor is always present, even in the most sentimental, okay, of his novels. Even in the most sentimental, there is humor. How can we see this humor? How is it evident? He expresses his humor most of all with the creation of characters who have who have got some distinctive peculiarity. They are kinds not simply characters, but caricatures. Okay, caricature. So these characters have very marked distinctive personal peculiarity. For example, something dealing with the way they speak, with the speech, something dealing with their physical appearance, something dealing with the gestures they do. Okay, and these characteristics, which are distinctive and peculiar, okay, characterize their characters. And these characters, which are considered like caricatures, um, where joy could be mixed with the creation of very comic situations. This is the way he uses humor. So don't forget that Dickens's novels can make you both cry and laugh and smile, thanks to his humor, the use of his humor. We said that he wrote 14 and a half novels, and most of his novels have got as fundamental theme the social criticism, as you can see here. So they criticize. Hmm? They criticize the vices, the virtues, the contradictions, the injustice of the British Victorian society. Here in this scheme, I have I have listed some examples for you. Let's start with the first novel, which is generally considered social, okay? A novel of social criticism, Dickens's first novel. It is Oliver Twist, as you can see here. Oliver Twist was written, okay, and published in installments from 1837 to 1839. What is the most important form of social criticism? What aspects of the British society does Dickens criticize in this novel? For example, in Oliver Twist, he criticizes the workhouses, the system of workhouses, and he criticizes, for example, the exploitation of children, okay, in Victorian society, children who were forced to work hard in factories, um, children who were forced to fight to make a living. Mm? Then, for example, another of the novels which expresses clearly this social criticism is Dombey and Son, which was published in 1846. What is the what does this novel criticize? Okay, what aspect of British society does it criticize? It criticizes the greed, the big, enormous greed for money and power. More and more people were greedy. They wanted money, they wanted power. Okay, this in Dickens' opinion, was one of the most important flaws of the Victorian society, this greed for power and for money. What else? Let's go, for example, to David Copperfield. Okay, David Copperfield, as you know, because we have already stated it, was one of his autobiographical novels, and he stated, Dickens himself stated that David Copperfield was very close to him, very similar to him, to the young Dickens the child. And this novel, David Copperfield, focuses or criticizes poverty, criticizes the division of class in classes. This is another form, as we are stating, of social criticism. Let's go, for example, to another novel, okay, that is a clear example of social criticism made by Dickens. I mean Black House. Black means desolata, okay. It was a novel which was published between 1852 and 1853, and it criticizes another social aspect of Britain, of Victorian Britain, that was the administration of justice, how justice was administered in Britain. Okay, so another form of criticism of one of the aspects of British society. And we can close, these are only examples, with Hard Times. Hard Times is a novel which was published in 1854, and it focuses on a social criticism of education, of how the Victorians used to educate their children, the young generations. And it also criticized the hardship of the working class during the Industrial Revolution. So the problems, the hardship, the difficult life, the life really full of problems which the working classes or the working class had to live during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so why have I listed these novels? Because you can understand that in some novels in particular, like in these ones, but in most of his 15 novels, Dickens openly criticized Victorian society. But I want you not to forget something that we have stated, that is, social criticism remained a kind of criticism, but he never proposed any possible suggestion. He never said do this and do that. He never said what to change, not what to change, how to change. Okay, so he never proposed any type of solution to these social problems in Britain. This is very important. He advocated for change, but he didn't suggest any possible change. Let's have a very, very quick look to all of his 15 novels. I've listed them all. Don't worry, I don't want you to remember them all, but maybe some of them which you already know or which, in your opinion, are more interesting. And the very first novel that he wrote and published was The Pickwick Papers. And this novel was published in 1836 and it is also known with the name as the posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club. It was published in installments, and you will see that all of his novels were published in installments um, between March 1836 and November 1837. And what does this novel deal with? It deals with, as we know, the injustice of the justice system. Injustice of the justice system. It can look or it might sound like a pun, un gioco di parole, l'ingiustizia del sistema giudiziario. Okay, this is the theme of the Pickwick Papers, as I know, also known as the posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club. Okay, but it is very full of humor. So there is a serious subject which Dickens is dealing with in with a humorous comic tone. Okay, full of humor. Then his second novel was published in installments from February 1837 to April 1839, and the title of his very famous novel is Oliver Twist. You know how many editions, how many films, movies, cartoons have been taken out of Oliver Twist. Okay, how many, how many. And the full title, okay, the first edition had a very long title. In fact, now we know it as with the title of Oliver Twist, but the entire title was Oliver Twist or the Parish Boys' Progress, ossia Oliver Twist o il progresso, ok, il cambiamento del ragazzo di parrocchia. It is usually known as a Bildungsroman. What does it mean, Bildungsroman? Romanzo di formazione. So there is a person, okay, in this case there is an orphan, okay, that lives a lot of adventures which starts his life and he goes on. And what is his idea? To become a gentleman, to become a respectable Victorian man. Okay, don't forget that Dickens wanted to become a respectable Victorian man. Don't forget of the house that he managed to buy. That same house which his father had showed him, and he managed finally to buy it and to go and live there. So he had, as Oliver Twist, okay, he had a difficult life, a very difficult childhood. He had faced a lot of problems, but as Oliver Twist, he managed to become a respectable Victorian man. And let's go to his third and fourth novel. The third novel was published in 1838. Its title is Nicholas Nickleby, and there is one character in this novel which is Mrs. Nickleby that was modeled on Dickens's mother, that, as you know, was Elizabeth Dickens. But this woman, this character, Mrs. Nickleby, is always confused. Her most important characteristic is the fact that she's always very confused, and Dickens's mother was so confused that she didn't recognize herself into the character. Okay, and so this is an example of also his irony, of the way he uses humor, and of the way Dickens used his personal life, his knowledge, his personal experience in order to create these memorable, unforgettable characters. The fourth novel that he published was The Old Curiosity Shop, and it was published in installments between April 1840 and February 1841. And in order to write this novel, he took inspiration from the death of his sister-in-law, Mary Hogarth. As you know, Mary Hogarth was his wife's sister. Then let's go to his fifth and sixth novel. The fifth novel was published in 1841 in installments from February to November in a magazine that was called Master Humphrey's Clock. And Barnaby Rudge is a kind of historical novel which is set during the Gordon riots in London in 1780. Why historical novel? Because it is the only novel which is not set in Dickens's contemporary England, so it's not set in the Victorian age, in the age that Charles Dickens knew, but it is set some years, about 40 years or more, 60 years before, so historical. And it is based on real events which took place, which happened in London in 1780, which were riots, okay, of the Protestant people against the Catholics, with a lot of victims. And it took inspiration from these events to show how easy it was in England to have riots, to make riots start. Now let's go to his sixth novel, which is Martin Chuzzlewit. It was published in 1843. Once again in installments. And this novel was written when he and his family came back or went back to Britain from the United States of America, or America, sorry, in 1842. The idea that we have of America that comes out of this novel is not is not a good one. Dickens, in fact, went back from the United States with a very unfavorable impression of the life of the United States of America. Then he wrote other two novels, so let's go to his seventh and eighth novel. His seventh novel was published in installments again from 1846 to 1848, and the title of this novel is Dombey and Son. Okay, this novel is usually considered important because of the fact that when Dickens read the first of the installments to some of his friends aloud, his friends were so enthusiastic of his reading that this gave Dickens the idea of doing public readings, and we know that he was also very successful because he used to read in public, to do these public readings, which were considered a very popular form of entertainment during the Victorian age. Then let's go to one of the novels which is among the best known of Dickens, which was published in 1848 and which was his eighth to be published. The title of this novel is David Copperfield. Also, this novel was firstly published as a serial, so in installments, And the first installment was published in May 1849, and the last was issued in November 1850. As we said, David Copperfield is an autobiographical novel, but then we will focus, in another lesson, we will focus on this novel. And this novel, as I have already said, was very important to Dickens. In fact, for example, as I have written here, in the preface to the 1867 edition, Dickens wrote, I will read it for you, but you can read it alone. Like many fond parents, I have in my heart of hearts a favorite child, and his name is David Copperfield. So he considered David Copperfield as the young Dickens, as Dickens the child, and he was particularly fond of this child, and of this character. I said children, maybe I was wrong. Okay. Then let's go to the other two novels, other novels that he wrote. Bleak House and Our Times. Okay, Bleak House was published in 1852 in installments again, and the 10th novel, Our Times, is very important because we will study, in fact, not because, in fact, we will study some parts of it, and it was also published in installments as a weekly periodical, and it was published in Dickens' own weekly periodical, whose title was Household Words. Okay, and Hard Times focuses on mechanization, utilitarianism, and on the problems of the most important problems of Victorian education and Victorian industrialization. Let's go on to the 11th and 12th novel that Dickens wrote. They are Little Dorrit and the Tale of Two Cities. Little Dorrit. Also Little Dorrit as Oliver Twist and we said David Copperfield as protagonist a child, but in this case she's a girl, the little Dorrit. This novel, again, so don't forget it, was published in installments, so it was serialized. And in Little Dorrit, we find a very detailed description of Marshall C. Debitor's prison. Don't forget what Marshall C. Debitor's prison was. It was exactly the same prison where Dickens' father had been sent for 3 months, okay, for financial problems, for debts. So Dickens knew that prison very well. Don't forget what we said when we spoke of Dickens's life. We said that all of his family went to Marshall C. Debitor's prison to follow his father, but him. He stayed nearby because he was forced to work. Okay. Let's go to his 12th novel, that is A Tale of Two Cities. Here again, it was published in installments in 1859, and this is important, okay, not only because of the story, but because of the gossip, okay, because it is inspired by Dickens's play that was a tale of the Frozen Deep, that was the Frozen Deep, that was exactly Dickens's play, which made him meet the very young actress Ellen Ternan, who became his lover. Okay, and so the scandal, the Victorian scandal, the fact that he left his wife and all of his children, that he never asked for divorce because it was not allowed. It would have been considered a scandal in the Puritan, okay, narrow-minded Victorian society. So this, don't forget that this novel, his 12th, A Tale of Two Cities, was inspired by the play A Frozen Deep, for which he met his lover Ellen Ternan. Okay. Now, let's go to his 13th, 14th, and half 15th novel. The 13th novel was Great Expectation. Here again, it was published in installments in from December 1860. Okay, from so the very end of the year to until August 1861. The protagonist of Great Expectation is Pip, here again a young boy, okay, and Pip, the protagonist, like Dickens himself, tries and dreams before and then tries to become a gentleman. He studies and he has to face a lot of difficulties, he has to face a lot of problems, but at the end, Pip realizes that wealth, station, okay, station means a position, a good position in society, are not everything. Okay, there is more in life than station and wealth. Mm? Then Dickens's 14th novel was published in 1864, and it is the last that Dickens managed to finish, to complete before dying. And then we have the very last one that, as you know, remained unfinished because he was writing The Mystery of Edwin Drood in 1870 when he died. Okay. Now I would like to focus on some of the most important characteristics of Dickens's novels, as I said, and one of the most important is the characteristics, or are the characteristics of the plots that he built. The plots in Dickens, or the plots of all his novels, are rather episodic. Episodic. What do I mean episodic? That since he published them chapter by chapter, book after book, okay, episode after episode, sometimes they look like they are not very well connected. They are episodes, as the episodes of a TV series. Sometimes you say, oh, what is the connection between this episode and the one which I saw before? This means to have an episodic structure. But the importance of the fact that they were episodic and that Dickens's novels were published, as we have seen all of them in installments, so in periodical publications, made Dickens to use some tools. Okay, he needed to maintain interest from one episode to another. Why? Because he needed people to buy the following episode, not to stop to the first, but to buy the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and so on. So he needed to keep the interest from one episode to another. And what did he do? First of all, he needed suspense. What is suspense? He needed suspense because he needed the person or the reader to feel the need to buy the following episode. And he created this suspense in a specific, particular way. He ended each episode with a dramatic turn of the events. So at the end of each episode, of each installment, he put an event which turned dramatically all the story. And so he created suspense. The people were willing to know what would happen in the following chapter, in the following episode. Okay, so this dramatic turn of the event created the needed suspense that made the readers to buy the following installments. Then, another important characteristic of his plot, of Dickens's plot, is linked to the need for suspense, is linked to the need to maintain interest from one episode to the other. And it is this abundance of characters. He really creates a lot of different characters. Some of them go on, okay, from chapter to chapter, from episode to episode. Some of them are only in one particular episode and they are never seen anymore. Some of them, as I know, become really important and they are the protagonists of the novels. But this abundance of characters characterizes his novels, a lot of them. Think of a TV series that you know, I don't know, Grey's Anatomy, La Casa di Carta, okay, whatever you want. How many characters have you got? You've got some main characters, central important ones, which go on, and some of them that you only see once, twice, okay, which are not important but which make the series. In this case, they make the novel. A lot of them, most of them very different ones from the others. Then, his plots are also characterized by improbable coincidence. Why? So they are episodic. There are sometimes coincidences which are really strange, improbable. And you say, oh my God, how is it possible that something like that is happening? But it happens. Think of the TV series, for example, people who we think are dead, that they come back to life. Okay, people that we think are disappeared are never, we don't know where they are after 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons or 5, 6, 7, 8 episodes. They appear like out of magic. Okay, or we understand, for example, I don't know if you have ever seen a TV series or like telenovela as Beautiful or something like that, in which you discover that the mother of somebody's mother is not actually his or her mother, but he is actually his or her sister. Very strange, improbable coincidence. Then his novels, all of his novels, are characterized by the presence of subplots. So there is the main story, okay, the main story, the story of the most important character, of the protagonist, and then together with this story there are a lot of subplots, so a lot of other stories that mix up, okay. And then one of Dickens's characteristics, that's why I like something of what he wrote, but not everything, is, but please don't say, is, is melodramatic tone. He often uses this tone which is really melodramatic, full of sentimentality. Why? Because it was exactly what his readers were inclined to. The Victorian readers, the middle class Victorian readers, the new readers were inclined to this kind of sentimentality. They wanted to cry, they wanted strong feelings, questo sentimentalismo. And in order to please his readers, because he needed the money of his readers, Dickens wrote using this kind of melodramatic tone. Okay, let's focus on another characteristic of Dickens's novel, which is the setting that he used. Oh, here there is something that I don't understand. Okay, there is something that is written extra here, but it is obviously not part of the slide. I don't know what's happened. So the setting, what is the setting? The place or the places where Dickens set his novel, okay? Where they happen, where the events happen, the story takes place. He focused, or his favorite setting was the city. Most of all, the industrial city. Sometimes the cities are true. For example, they are London. Sometimes they have names, invented names. They are product of fancy. For example, Coketown, okay, in our times. But most of the setting of his novels are industrial cities, okay, and he usually describes the cities, and most of all London, making or describing or focusing on three different social levels. There is at the top the social level, mm, that includes the Victorian middle class. So it describes respectable people who believe in human dignity, who belong to the middle class, who work hard, who make their own the values of the Victorian society, the most important ones. You should remember them. Then he also describes as the second level of this of the industrial society, the criminal world, and is one of the first in Europe and most of all in Britain to focus not only on the middle class, okay, but to focus on the world of the last, okay, of the neglected, of the poor, of the criminals, murderers, pickpockets, children or people who live in slums, squalid, dirty. And another level of society which he focuses on in his novels, in his settings, is the level of the parochial world, or the world of the workhouses. Okay, the world of workhouses with all its inhabitants who, as you know, belong to the lower middle class, to the poorest people who lived in British Victorian society. When he focuses in London, when he sets his novels in London, it doesn't describe the richest part, the wealthiest part of the city, but it describes in details an area of London which is called the Seven Dials, okay, which was a very famous slum district. You can see here, for example, a painting, yes, by Gustave Doré, okay. They were this district of slums where only poor people, neglected people used to live, okay. Then let's focus on the characters. Who are the people described by Dickens? We have already said something about the three social classes, okay, but we have already said that he creates a lot of characters. We have already said that he creates kind of caricatures because they are not described, most of them psychologically in details with deep, okay, psychological features, but most of these characters that he creates, that he describes, that animate his novels, are embody virtues and vices. They're good or they're bad. They're generous, for example, or they're greed. They're talkative or they are completely silent. They have exaggerated characteristics. And his characters, I want to repeat it because it is really important, belong from all the walks of life. We find some Victorian gentlemen, we find lawyers, we find also industrialists, we find tradesmen, we find teachers, shopkeepers, laborers, but also thieves, pickpockets, laborers, as I said, people living in the slums, in the workhouses. So this big stage that he creates is full of characters belonging to most of the social classes, but with a particular sympathy, okay, we said, for the neglected ones, the last, the poor, the people which nobody considered important. In fact, as you can see here, I wrote that Dickens in Britain was maybe the really first to shift the social frontiers of the novel, to move, to shift the frontiers, social frontiers of the novel. The novel, of the previous century, think of, for example, of what did we read? Frankenstein, okay, was based on the life of the upper middle class world, a scientist, Victor Frankenstein, okay. He belonged to a rather rich upper class family. Now Dickens changes, okay, he shifts from the world of the upper middle class, which had characterized the characters of the 18th century novel, to the world of the lower classes, of the poor people, of the people, of the workers in factories, of the people living in slums or in terrible, dirty, crowded workhouses. So he depicted the Victorian society in all its variety, in all its richness, but also in all of its squalor, okay, poverty. We have already said that he created a lot of caricatures, and he was on the side. To be on the side means schierarsi, essere dalla parte di, of the working class, as we said, of the poor, of the outcast, of all those people which he felt very close to him, to what his life as a child had been, to all the problems that he had to face when he was young, when he was a child, and that I remember I want to remind you, he never forgot. We are approaching to the end of this lesson. Don't worry, expected it to be shorter, but as you know, I start talking and I have so much to say that it is very difficult to squeeze everything in an hour. Let's focus on the themes which characterize Dickens's novels. The first is obviously family and childhood. Okay, family, the importance of the family, the importance of childhood, the importance of poverty, of the last people, the neglected ones. Okay, and the children. A lot of novels have children as protagonists or as very important characters. Here, for example, you can see a scene taken from Roman Polanski's movie Oliver Twist, which was broadcast in 2005. Oliver Twist was the protagonist of his novel, of one of his novels. And so this world of children, this childhood, which characterizes his novels, is made of children who are innocent, for example, Oliver, okay, or also corrupted by adults. We find a lot of children who were born innocent, as all the children, but were then corrupted by adults, by experience. I hope you can create some links in your hands when I speak of innocence, experience, childhood, adulthood, and so on. Most of the children which populate his novels have a very difficult life. They were usually born in negative circumstances, and little by little, step after step, they rise to happy endings. Okay, they enter in the adult world and they manage to be Victorian middle class men. The very last thing that I want to say you deals with the aim that Charles Dickens had when he wrote. Dickens wanted to get, okay, the common intelligence of the country to alleviate social sufferings. He wanted to make people understand that the social injustice led to social sufferings, and he wanted people to understand it, to be aware of it. Okay? For this reason, he was a social novelist, but not only social, he was a campaigning novelist, campaigning, because he wanted to show what the problems of Victorian society were, and he also wanted people to be aware of what was going on around them. Okay, he wanted to educate. He had a moral aim, and he also wanted to teach. Okay, which were the Victorian controversies that he wanted to point out? He wanted the people to see the faults of the legal system, for example, also in the Pickwick Papers, that was his very first novel, as we said. For example, the scandals in the schools, so the problems of education, the hardship of the working of the life in factories or in workhouses. He wanted the miseries of prostitution, the corruption in government, the living condition in slums. He wanted to highlight all of these problems of Victorian society. Okay, so don't forget that this was his aim, to highlight the problems of Victorian society, to make the people, okay, understand what the real situation of the Victorian age was. Not everything was beautiful, not everything was perfect, but under this surface of wealth, of progress, there was a word, the word of the last, okay, the word of the people that nobody considered. Don't forget what we said about the contrasts which characterized the Victorian society. Now I close here for a minute. I go back to my face. Oh my God, I think, okay, I have the sun, okay, in my face. I do apologize, but I am in the kitchen today. And I would like to say that this is what deals totally with Charles Dickens, and that I will make you, no, sorry, I have also put in the folder, and so in these presentations, the questions, okay, that you can find on in your book, and they are, I think, on page 65 or 66. I will be more precise. It's the checkpoint. I expect you to do this checkpoint, but I will give you it as it to you as a homework tomorrow, okay, because we are meeting tomorrow. Okay, so guys, that's all for now. See you online, and please go on studying Charles Dickens's life and all of his all the characteristics of his novels, of his art, of his literature. Bye guys, see you soon.